There comes a point in every empath's life when they finally say, enough. It's not anger. It's not revenge. It's not even bitterness. It's clarity. It's the moment they realize that caring too much for the wrong person cost them everything they ever were. The super empath, the one who feels deeply, loves completely, and forgives endlessly, often spends years trying to heal others while silently breaking inside. They keep giving, believing that one day the other person will finally see their worth. But the truth is, people don't change because you love them harder. They change because they decide to, and when the empath finally understands this, they stop trying to fix what didn't want to be fixed. That's when they go no contact. And that single act, quiet, powerful, and absolute, changes everything. No contact is not punishment. It's self-preservation. It's the moment the empath chooses peace over chaos, truth over illusion, and healing over habit. The person who once couldn't stop explaining, couldn't stop caring, couldn't stop hoping, finally stops. And in that silence, they rediscover their own voice. They realize that love doesn't mean tolerance of pain, and compassion doesn't mean allowing someone to disrespect your boundaries. The person who once felt powerless now becomes unshakable. They stop reacting to the manipulations, the guilt, the mind games, because they've learned that not responding is a response. It's the most powerful one. Here's the thing. When the super empath goes no contact, the dynamic shifts. The person who thrived on their energy suddenly faces emptiness. The game they used to play no longer works because the empath isn't playing anymore. The emotional supplier is gone, and so is their control. But this isn't about revenge. It's about rebirth. The empath begins to rebuild, slowly, steadily, beautifully. They find joy in quiet moments, pride in boundaries, and freedom in detachment. They stop chasing closure from others because they create it for themselves. And the irony? The person who once drained their light now becomes a shadow in their story. When the super empath goes no contact, they don't just walk away from someone else. They walk back to themselves. And that's the moment their power returns, stronger, calmer, wiser. So if you're listening to this and you've reached that breaking point, remember this. Walking away doesn't make you weak. It makes you whole. Detaching doesn't mean you stopped loving. It means you started respecting yourself more. And when you choose peace over pain, the universe always meets you halfway. No contact is often misunderstood as a cruel or cold-hearted decision, but in reality, it is an act of deep emotional clarity. When a super empath decides to go no contact, they are not trying to hurt anyone. They are finally choosing not to hurt themselves anymore. It's the moment they recognize that continuing communication with someone who manipulates their empathy, disrespects their boundaries, or thrives on emotional chaos is no longer an act of love, but of self-betrayal. No contact is the empath's way of saying, I choose peace over pain. I choose myself. It is a turning point where the empath learns that they do not owe anyone unlimited access to their heart, especially when that access is being abused. At first, the silence feels heavy. The super empath, being naturally nurturing, feels guilt for withdrawing as if they are abandoning someone in need. But over time, they begin to see the difference between compassion and self-sacrifice. Compassion means wishing someone well, even from a distance. Self-sacrifice means staying connected to someone who keeps draining your energy and damaging your spirit. The empath begins to understand that they can still love someone and let them go. They can still care and maintain distance. That realization brings immense freedom because they no longer confuse staying with caring. They start to see that leaving can be the greatest expression of self-respect. Clarity begins to replace confusion. The empath starts to see how much of their emotional energy was spent explaining, defending, or fixing. Every unanswered question, every false apology, every circular argument once kept them trapped in an endless cycle of hope and disappointment. But once the empath steps away, the pattern becomes clear. They can see the manipulation for what it was. Not a reflection of their worth, but a reflection of someone else's inability to love healthily. And that clarity feels like light after a long storm. It doesn't erase the pain, but it gives meaning to it. No contact is not about building walls. It's about creating boundaries that honor your growth. The empath learns that silence is not avoidance. It's alignment. It's the quiet space where healing begins. In that silence, their thoughts settle, their heart steadies, and their intuition grows stronger. They realize that by cutting off access, they are not being cruel. They are finally allowing themselves to breathe. The constant anxiety of waiting for a message, decoding mixed signals, or bracing for emotional ups and downs starts to fade. They no longer live in reaction to someone else's moods. Most importantly, no contact teaches the empath the value of emotional energy. They understand that love without limits can destroy the giver, and boundaries are not barriers. They are bridges to peace. This shift in perception transforms their relationship with themselves. They no longer apologize for needing space, for setting limits, or for prioritizing mental health. They finally understand that clarity isn't cruel. It's compassionate, both to themselves and to the other person. Because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for both souls is to walk away and let silence do the healing that words never could. There comes a moment in every empath's journey when they finally understand that love, no matter how pure or powerful, cannot heal someone who refuses to change. For a long time, the super empath believes that if they love deeply enough, stay patient long enough, and forgive endlessly, the other person will eventually see the light and transform. They pour everything they have into someone else's wounds, thinking that their empathy can fix the cracks in another person's soul. But love, even in its most selfless form, is not a cure for unwillingness. Change doesn't come from being loved harder. It comes from wanting to be better. When an empath realizes this, it's a moment of painful clarity, but also of liberation. The super empath has a unique ability to see potential in people. They see not just what someone is, but what they could become. This gift is beautiful, but dangerous because it blinds them to reality. They fall in love with possibilities rather than patterns. They ignore red flags, excusing destructive behavior as pain or trauma, and they keep trying to heal someone who isn't even reaching for help. Every time the empath gives, they lose a piece of themselves, until one day they realize they've become the caretaker in a relationship that was supposed to be mutual. Love begins to feel more like labor than connection. Healing cannot happen through force or persistence. The empath begins to see that transformation requires willingness, accountability, and effort, none of which can be given from the outside. They could offer understanding, compassion, and countless second chances. But if the other person refuses to look inward, every act of love becomes a bandage over a wound that never closes. The empath learns that staying in such a dynamic only enables the other person's stagnation while draining their own energy. The desire to rescue becomes a trap, and what once felt like unconditional love starts to feel like self-destruction. When this truth sinks in, the empath's entire approach to love changes. They start valuing reciprocity over rescue, effort over excuses, and growth over promises. They begin to realize that love is not about saving someone, it's about standing beside someone who is saving themselves. The most meaningful relationships are built not on dependency, but on mutual accountability. Two people willing to face their flaws, learn, and evolve together. Anything less is an imbalance disguised as devotion. This awakening doesn't make the empath cold or cynical. If anything, it makes them wiser, more discerning, and more compassionate in a balanced way. They learn to love without losing themselves, to care without being consumed, and to walk away when love turns into suffering. They stop trying to change people and start choosing people who are already committed to change. And that shift in mindset becomes the foundation of real connection. Love, in its healthiest form, inspires growth. It doesn't demand self-erasure. The empath finally realizes that the most powerful act of love is not fixing someone else, but choosing to grow alongside those who are willing to heal themselves. Silence has a power that words can never match. And when a super empath finally learns this truth, everything about their energy begins to shift. For years, they may have been caught in a pattern of over-explaining, defending, and justifying their feelings to someone who never really listened. They believed that if they could just express themselves clearly enough, the other person would finally understand, finally change, finally care. But eventually, the empath reaches a point of exhaustion, not because they have nothing left to say, but because they realize that their words no longer matter to someone who was never listening in the first place. That's when silence becomes their new language, and it speaks louder than any explanation ever could. When the empath stops responding, it unsettles the person who once thrived on their energy. The manipulator or emotionally unavailable partner who used to control the narrative suddenly loses access to the reactions that kept them powerful. Silence breaks the cycle of emotional dependency. It removes the fuel from the fire. The empath no longer plays the role of the explainer, the fixer, or the peacekeeper. They become an observer, detached and calm. In that stillness, they realize how much emotional chaos they had been tolerating under the disguise of trying to make it work. Silence becomes not a retreat, but a boundary, an invisible wall that says, "You no longer have the right to disturb my peace." Choosing silence is not a sign of weakness. It is one of the bravest forms of self-control. It takes immense strength to hold back the urge to explain yourself, especially to someone who twists your truth. It takes discipline to resist the bait of arguments, to walk away instead of engaging, to choose peace over the temporary satisfaction of being understood. The empath discovers that they do not owe explanations to anyone who is committed to misunderstanding them. In silence, they reclaim their emotional autonomy. They no longer need validation to feel secure, nor do they crave the chaos that once made them feel needed. This shift also transforms how the empath views communication. They begin to understand that true connection doesn't require convincing. It requires mutual understanding. When someone genuinely cares, they don't need constant explanations to respect your feelings. And when someone doesn't, no amount of talking will ever make them see you differently. Silence becomes the mirror that reflects both truth and intention. It reveals who genuinely values you and who only valued the control they had over you. As the empath embraces silence, they begin to heal. The mental noise fades, the emotional turbulence settles, and they start hearing their own voice again, the one that was buried under endless justifications and emotional noise. Silence, once uncomfortable, becomes sacred. It's the space where the empath reclaims power, rebuilds self-trust, and recenters their energy. They learn that walking away quietly can echo louder than any goodbye, and that the absence of reaction can dismantle manipulation faster than confrontation ever could. In the end, silence isn't emptiness. It's empowerment. It's the sound of peace replacing chaos, of strength taking the place of struggle, and of a heart finally choosing itself over the need to be heard. Detachment is not the absence of love, it's the rebirth of self after being lost in the chaos of someone else's world. When a super empath goes no contact, they enter a phase that feels both painful and liberating. At first, there's emptiness. The silence feels unnatural, almost unbearable. The empath has spent so long being emotionally intertwined with another person's needs, moods, and crises that being alone feels like withdrawal. But as time passes, something begins to shift. That same silence that once felt heavy begins to feel sacred. In it, the empath starts to rediscover who they are without the constant noise of emotional chaos. The process of detachment becomes a journey back to identity, and through that, the empath experiences a quiet kind of rebirth. During this stage, the empath learns to see themselves outside the role of the healer or fixer. For years, their worth may have been tied to how much they could give, how much they could endure, or how much they could forgive. Detachment breaks that illusion. It teaches them that love should not demand the erosion of self. They start to rebuild from the inside out, relearning what peace feels like, what solitude can offer, and what boundaries truly mean. They find comfort in their own company and strength in their silence. The need to be needed fades, replaced by the desire to be whole. Rebirth through detachment is not about becoming indifferent or cold-hearted. It's about healing the parts of the empath that once believed they had to suffer for love. As they let go of the emotional ties that bound them, they begin to see how much energy they spent trying to earn affection that should have been freely given. They start to nurture themselves with the same tenderness they once reserved for others. Simple moments, a quiet morning, a walk alone, a deep breath, become symbols of freedom. They realize that they no longer have to chase peace. It was always waiting beneath the noise of their attachments. In detachment, clarity blooms. The empath starts to see the relationship for what it truly was, not what they hoped it could be. They notice the patterns, the manipulation, and the emotional imbalance with new eyes that are no longer clouded by longing. This understanding doesn't breed resentment, it brings acceptance. They stop wishing for closure from the other person because they create it themselves. They stop replaying the past and start living in the present. Each day of distance brings more stability, and each moment of solitude strengthens their emotional independence. The beauty of this rebirth lies in how subtle yet profound it is. The empath doesn't wake up one day completely healed. Rather, they evolve quietly. Their energy shifts, their boundaries solidify, their heart becomes softer, but their spirit grows stronger. They begin to love differently, not out of fear of losing someone, but out of gratitude for finding themselves. Through detachment, the empath is not escaping love. They are transforming it, turning it inward where it finally belongs, and in doing so, they rise from the ashes of emotional exhaustion into the light of self-renewal. Walking away is often seen as giving up, but for the super empath, it is the moment they finally come home to themselves. After years of overextending, overgiving, and overcaring, there comes a quiet realization that staying in an unbalanced relationship is not loyalty, it's self-abandonment. The empath, who once defined love as sacrifice, begins to understand that true love cannot exist where self-respect is absent. When they finally choose to walk away, it isn't a sign of weakness or bitterness. It's the deepest act of self-love they've ever shown. It's the moment they stop asking, how can I make them happy? And start asking, what do I need to heal? This step is never easy. The empath has spent so long defining themselves by the role they played in someone else's life that walking away feels like losing part of their identity. They grieve not just the person, but the version of themselves that existed in that relationship. The one who believed love meant fixing, enduring, and forgiving endlessly. But as painful as it feels, that grief becomes a gateway. Each tear, each pang of loneliness brings them closer to truth. They start to see that leaving someone who couldn't value them is not the end of love. It's the beginning of a different kind of love. One that begins within. When the empath walks away, they begin to rediscover their own rhythm. They no longer wake up anxious about someone else's moods. They no longer walk on eggshells, trying to keep peace that was never theirs to hold. They learn to enjoy their own silence, their own space, their own company. For the first time in a long while, they are free to choose themselves without guilt. The constant emotional noise fades, replaced by an inner calm that feels foreign at first, but soon becomes home. This calm doesn't come from someone else's reassurance. It comes from within, built on the foundation of self-respect and hard-earned wisdom. In this process of walking away, the empath also learns to see love differently. They begin to understand that love should never cost one's peace or identity. Healthy love nurtures, it doesn't drain, it supports, it doesn't suffocate. The empath realizes that walking away doesn't mean they stopped loving. It means they stopped accepting a version of love that hurt more than it healed. This shift changes everything. They no longer chase people or beg to be seen. They no longer mistake intensity for intimacy or confusion for passion. They become rooted in clarity and grounded in peace. With time, walking away turns into walking back to joy, back to confidence, back to purpose. The empath learns to trust their own voice again, to believe that they are enough without having to prove it. They begin to attract relationships that reflect their healed energy. Calm, respectful, reciprocal. The person who once lost themselves trying to be loved now shines from a place of wholeness. In walking away from what broke them, they don't lose anything real. They reclaim everything they were meant to be. Walking away, in the end, is not departure, it's homecoming. In the end, when the super empath goes no contact, it's not about rejection or revenge, it's about rebirth. It's the moment they stop searching for love in places that drain them and start finding it within themselves. They rediscover peace, reclaim power, and rise with a quieter, wiser kind of strength. Walking away becomes an act of courage. Silence becomes their sanctuary, and self-respect becomes their greatest victory. Thank you for listening. And may every heart that's ever broken learn that healing begins the moment you choose yourself.